Marcus Sterling was not a man who smiled often. At 45, he had built an empire of restaurants through precision, discipline, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. His signature steel-grey suits, his clipped words, and his ability to notice a crooked napkin from across a crowded room made him legendary in the business world. But his success had cost him something he couldn't quantify: his humanity. 6 years ago, a car accident had stolen two things from Marcus simultaneously: his wife, Catherine, and his son's ability to walk. David, now just 6 years old, had spent most of his life in a wheelchair, surrounded by nurses, therapists, and the suffocating silence of a mansion too large for a broken family. The boy rarely smiled. He spent his days waiting for a father who was always somewhere else. Marcus rarely went home. When he did, it was late at night, and he would stand in the doorway of David's room, watching his sleeping son, whispering words the child would never hear. The guilt was immense, but Marcus had learned to bury it beneath spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Sterling Central, the flagship restaurant in the heart of the city, was where Marcus felt most alive, if alive was even the right word. Every detail mattered. Every employee understood that imperfection was not an option. The moment anything went wrong, Marcus would appear, his voice low and his expectations clear. The staff moved like dancers performing a carefully choreographed routine, their movements precise, their smiles professional. Helena worked 2 jobs, but even that wasn't enough. She arrived at Sterling Central in the early morning, before the breakfast rush, and stayed long into the evening, helping wherever she was needed. She cleaned tables, organized the kitchen, occasionally worked the counter. At 32, she looked older, not because of her face, but because of the weight she carried in her shoulders. 3 children depended on her: Sophie, age 12, Marcus, age 10, and little Emma, age 6. They lived in a small apartment in a neighborhood where the walls were thin and the rent was always due too soon. There was no dishwasher, no microwave, barely enough space for anyone to breathe. Yet Helena made it work. She cleaned, she organized, she created routines that held everything together. Every morning before dawn, she packed lunches for her children. Every night, no matter how exhausted, she helped with homework and read bedtime stories. She never complained, not once, even when her feet throbbed so badly she had to massage them sitting on the kitchen floor. Her children had never heard frustration in her voice. They only knew love. At the restaurant, Helena moved through her tasks with quiet efficiency. She didn't talk much. She didn't expect recognition. She simply worked, competently and without complaint. Managers appreciated her reliability. Customers didn't notice her at all. She was part of the furniture, a ghost moving through the space. What no one saw was the strength beneath that silence. When an elderly diner felt dizzy and nearly collapsed, Helena was there, holding him steady, bringing water, staying with him until he felt safe. When a co-worker's shift fell apart, Helena stepped in without being asked. She did these things not for praise, but because it was the right thing to do. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Marcus decided something unusual needed to happen. David had been quiet for months, withdrawn even by his standards. Perhaps, Marcus thought, a change of scenery might help. Perhaps. He brought his son to the restaurant for the first time since the accident. David was placed at a small table nearby while Marcus conducted business, watching his son from a distance the way he watched everything, with detachment masquerading as care. David sat rigid in his wheelchair, uncomfortable and afraid. He didn't understand why he was here. He didn't know what to do. A toy, a small plastic figure, slipped from his lap and fell to the floor just out of reach. The boy leaned forward, stretching his tiny arm, unable to grasp it. That's when Helena noticed. She paused mid-task, assessed the situation in a single moment, and walked toward David without hesitation. She knelt beside him, not above him, but beside him, eye to eye, and asked gently, "Would you like help with that?" David nodded, shy and uncertain. Helena picked up the toy and placed it in his small hands, but she didn't walk away. Instead, she adjusted his cushion, asked if he was comfortable, and stayed with him for several minutes, giving him her full, undivided attention. She didn't talk down to him. She didn't treat him like he was broken. She simply treated him like a boy who deserved kindness. David smiled, a real smile, the first genuine one in months. Across the restaurant, Marcus watched. His hands stilled on his papers. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He saw his son smile at this woman, this worker, this nobody, and it struck him like a physical blow. When was the last time David had smiled for him? The following week, David asked for Helena every time he came to the restaurant. "Is she here?" became his first question. Helena made time for him, adjusted her schedule, ensured he felt seen and valued. David began to open up, talking about his mother, his sadness, his small dreams. Helena listened like she had nowhere else to be. But whispers began in the kitchen. Melissa, a server with her own disappointments, watched the interaction with suspicion. She noticed how much time Helena spent with David. She noticed how often the boy asked for her. And she decided Helena must be scheming. Why else would someone suddenly care so much about the owner's son? "She's using him," Melissa told anyone who would listen, "trying to get noticed, trying to climb the ladder." The comments spread like poison through the staff. What had been seen as kindness was reframed as calculation. Helena's genuine care was twisted into ambitious manipulation. A few co-workers who had once respected her now avoided eye contact. The warmth of the workplace cooled. One afternoon, while helping an elderly customer who had stumbled, Helena paused her other tasks. She steadied him, brought him water, made sure he was safe. It took 10 minutes. When she returned to her section, several tables had dirty plates piling up. Melissa reported it immediately. "She's neglecting her duties," she said, "leaving work unfinished to spend time with the boss's son. It's obviously on purpose." The investigation was brief and one-sided. Helena was called to the manager's office and given a formal warning. When she tried to explain about the elderly customer, the manager barely listened. "Your job is to keep up," he said flatly. The warning was written. The decision was final. Marcus, influenced by the reports and the whispers, began to doubt. He watched Helena more carefully now, looking for signs of manipulation, for proof that she was taking advantage. He didn't see the truth. He only saw what fear made him see. David felt the shift immediately. When Marcus turned away, David stopped asking for Helena. The boy withdrew again, holding his toy like a lifeline, confused about why happiness had been taken from him. Helena, feeling the judgment and sensing the danger to her job, kept her distance. She no longer approached David. She watched him from across the room, heartbroken but powerless. But Helena was not someone who accepted injustice quietly. She had spent her whole life fighting for what mattered. Her children, her dignity, her integrity, these were non-negotiable. She remembered the elderly man she had helped. She found him. She explained what had happened, and she asked if he would speak to Marcus. The man agreed. When he arrived at the restaurant days later, he asked to speak to the owner. Marcus came out, expecting nothing. The elderly man, Thomas, spoke clearly about what he had witnessed. How Helena had abandoned everything to help him. How she had shown genuine compassion without knowing who he was or what benefit she might gain. "That's not someone scheming," Thomas said. "That's someone who does the right thing." Two women at nearby tables stepped forward. They too had seen the moment. They too confirmed the truth. Melissa tried to defend herself, but her words crumbled. The witnesses were undeniable. Richard stood still, taking in what he had heard, understanding finally how wrong he had been. His son had watched the entire exchange from across the room, hope blooming on his face for the first time in weeks. That evening, Marcus called Helena to his office. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "I made a mistake. I believed rumors instead of truth, and I see now what that cost." Helena said nothing, just listened. "I want to make you an offer," Marcus continued. "Full-time caregiver for David, higher salary, benefits, support for your children's education." He paused. "You've already done the job better than anyone else could. I'd like to make it official." Helena's eyes filled with tears. This wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. The investigation into Melissa revealed years of manipulation and false accusations. Her contract was terminated. The message was clear. The restaurant would no longer tolerate lies and cruelty. With financial stability, everything changed for Helena's family. Her children attended better schools. Emma got warm clothes. Sophie could focus on her studies instead of worrying about meals. The constant anxiety lifted. At the mansion, David began to thrive. Under Helena's patient care, his therapy improved dramatically. He laughed more. He asked questions. He set goals and worked toward them. The quiet house came alive. When Helena's children visited, David had friends for the first time in years. Sophie read to him. Marcus drew with him. Emma made him laugh with silly jokes. The mansion, which had been a tomb of silence, became a home. Richard, Marcus, watched this transformation and felt something shift inside himself. He began spending more time at home. He learned to listen. He learned that success meant nothing if he had no one to share it with. He included Helena and her children in outings, in meals, in the simple moments that actually mattered. David looked at Helena every morning and asked eagerly, "What are we doing today?" "Let's see what we can accomplish together," she would reply. And they did. Every single day, they accomplished something beautiful. Not in spite of the wheelchair, not in spite of the sadness that had come before, but through genuine connection and love. Helena's story spread through the restaurant, then through the community. She was no longer invisible. She became someone people spoke of with respect and admiration. When she was asked to speak at a school about courage, she stood in front of a room and said, "Sometimes people will judge you before they know you, but your actions speak louder than any rumor ever could." The mansion that had been cold and empty was now full of laughter. The restaurant that had been driven by fear and perfectionism began to heal. And a woman who had asked for nothing but a chance to be kind had changed not just one life, but an entire family. It had started with a single act of compassion, a child's fallen toy picked up by hands that asked nothing in return. It had cost her everything to do it right, and in the end, it had given her everything she needed. The lesson was simple but profound. Kindness is never wasted. It may be misunderstood, it may be punished, but it will always, eventually, find its way home.